It was a Thursday evening when I first noticed the shift. Anna, my wife of 8 years, had been acting differently for a while, quieter, more withdrawn. I chalked it up to stress from her work at the local hairdresser's, a job she loved but often found exhausting. She always had her regulars, people who adored her for her charm and skill with scissors. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I watched her. She laughed at something on her phone, a rare sound these days. I asked her what was funny, and she quickly dismissed it. "Just a silly meme," she said, locking her phone and flipping it face down on the table. The conversation shifted, but something in her response didn't sit right. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was being paranoid. But deep inside, a quiet whisper of doubt began to echo. Days turned into weeks, and that whisper grew louder. Anna started staying late at the salon more often than usual, claiming she had clients who could only come in after hours. At first, I believed her. She was hardworking and passionate about her career. But then came the small, unexplainable signs. Forgotten perfume bottles in the car, the sudden change in her playlists to love songs she used to hate, the subtle but noticeable distance in her eyes when she looked at me. One night, as she took our dog, Daisy, for a walk, a ritual she rarely missed, I found myself alone in the living room, replaying every moment that had felt off. I knew Daisy was her sanctuary, her escape when life got too overwhelming. But now, even those walks seemed different, longer, less frequent, and filled with an odd air of secrecy. I decided I needed to find out the truth, no matter how painful. What I didn't realize was just how much that truth would shatter everything I thought I knew about our life together. The following day, I decided to stop by the salon after work. It wasn't something I'd normally do, but curiosity gnawed at me. I thought maybe I'd surprise Anna with a coffee and some pastries, play the loving husband. The idea made me feel ridiculous, but I had to see for myself if the doubts were all in my head. When I arrived, the place was quiet, the hum of blow dryers and light chatter filling the air. Anna was at the far end, working on a client's hair. Her back was to me, her hands moving deftly through the strands, but something about her posture was different. Relaxed, but too much so, like she was comfortable in a way that felt unfamiliar. Before I could approach, one of her coworkers, Mia, spotted me. She greeted me warmly, her usual bubbly self, but her eyes flickered with something I couldn't place. Surprise? Nervousness? "Hey, Tom. Didn't know you were dropping by. Anna's just finishing up with one of her regulars." She motioned toward the chair. The man sitting there wasn't someone I recognized. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident smirk that made my stomach tighten. He looked up, saw me, and his expression didn't change. If anything, his smirk deepened. Anna turned then, and when she saw me, her face froze for the briefest moment before breaking into a smile. "Tom, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice slightly higher than usual. "I thought I'd bring you a little something," I said, holding up the bag of pastries and coffee. I kept my voice steady, my smile practiced. The man stood, brushing hair off his shoulders, and Anna quickly stepped in. "This is Dan," she said, gesturing between us. "He's one of my regulars. Comes in every couple of weeks." Dan extended a hand, his grip firm, almost challenging. "Nice to meet you," he said. "Likewise," I replied, my voice neutral. But as we shook hands, I couldn't ignore the way Anna shifted on her feet, like she was bracing for something. Dan left a few minutes later, tossing a casual, "See you next week," over his shoulder. Anna watched him go, her smile lingering a second too long. I handed her the coffee and pastries, pretending not to notice. "Thought you could use a pick-me-up." Her gratitude seemed genuine, but there was a tremor in her voice, a tension in her smile. "You're sweet," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. "I'll see you at home, okay?" I nodded, kissed her cheek, and walked out of the salon. But as I left, I glanced back through the glass door. Anna was staring at her phone, her expression unreadable. That night, I lay awake in bed while she slept soundly beside me, Daisy curled at her feet. The whisper in my mind had turned into a roar, and I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was happening between Anna and her regular, I was going to find out. The truth had already begun to unravel, and there was no going back after that night. I couldn't shake the image of Anna and Dan, the way she'd smiled at him, the ease between them. It gnawed at me, a constant ache that refused to fade. I needed to know more, so I decided to do something I'd never imagined myself doing. I started watching. The following week, I began paying closer attention to her routine. Anna was predictable in some ways. Her mornings, her dog walks, her love for chai tea from the cafe on the corner. But when it came to her evenings at the salon or her errands, there were gaps I couldn't account for. It wasn't long before the pieces started to fall into place. One Thursday, Anna mentioned she'd be staying late at work to close up the salon. I nodded as usual, pretending not to care, but something about the way she said it set off alarm bells. When she left, I waited 10 minutes, grabbed my coat, and followed. The salon was only a 15-minute drive, and as I parked across the street, I could see the lights were still on. Through the large front window, I spotted Anna sweeping the floor, her movements deliberate but almost restless. She wasn't alone. Dan was there. He sat in one of the chairs, spinning slowly like a bored teenager. Anna said something, and he laughed, a sound I could hear faintly even from where I sat. It wasn't just his presence that bothered me. It was the intimacy of their interaction, the way they seemed completely at ease, like this was their routine. I watched as Anna walked over, took the broom from his hands, and playfully swatted him with it. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her closer. My breath caught as she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her head tilting ever so slightly. That was when I knew. I felt the world tilt beneath me, a cold, sinking weight pressing on my chest. I wanted to burst through the door, to confront them right there, but I didn't move. Something held me back, a mix of shock, anger, and a desperate need for clarity. After a few minutes, they both moved out of sight, heading toward the back of the salon. My heart pounded in my ears as I sat there, frozen, watching the empty room through the glass. When Anna came home later that night, she acted as though nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek, thanked me for walking Daisy, and disappeared into the shower. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, the image of her and Dan replaying in my mind like a broken record. It was Daisy who broke the silence, patting over to nudge my leg with her nose. Her favorite toy dangled from her mouth, her tail wagging in oblivious joy. I knelt down, burying my face in her soft fur, my tears soaking into her coat. For Daisy, everything was still normal. For me, the life I thought I had was starting to crumble. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. The morning after witnessing Anna and Dan at the salon, I felt like I was moving through a fog. She greeted me with her usual smile, poured coffee into her favorite mug, and scratched Daisy behind the ears like nothing was wrong. "How'd you sleep?" she asked, her voice warm. "Fine," I lied. My chest tightened as I looked at her. How could she act so normal when everything between us was falling apart? Or maybe it wasn't for her. Maybe this was just her life now, half-truths and stolen moments. As she headed out for work, I resolved to take a closer look at her phone. She rarely left it unattended, always keeping it in her pocket or on silent, face down. But that day, as she showered, I noticed she'd left it charging on the kitchen counter. The temptation was overwhelming. I glanced toward the bathroom, listening for the rush of water. Then, with shaking hands, I unlocked her phone. She'd never changed her passcode. My birthday, of all things. The first thing I checked was her messages. Most were mundane. Her mother, co-workers, a few group chats. But then I saw a thread with a contact saved as D. My stomach sank. The messages were casual at first glance, short texts about scheduling haircuts and booking appointments. But as I scrolled further, the tone changed. Flirty banter turned into innuendos. Phrases like, "Can't wait to see you," and "Last night was amazing," stared back at me, mocking my naivety. The latest message was from Dan. "Can we meet tonight? Same place?" I felt sick. My hands trembled as I exited the messages and checked her photo gallery. Most were harmless, pictures of Daisy, random selfies, and snapshots of her work. But hidden in a folder titled, "Work Stuff," I found photos that made my blood run cold. Pictures of Anna and Dan together, their faces close, their smiles intimate. I locked the phone and placed it back on the counter just as the water shut off. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did she ever think about me when she was with him? When she came into the kitchen a few minutes later, toweling her hair, I was still standing there, staring blankly at my untouched coffee. "You okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up, glancing at the screen. Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders stiffened ever so slightly. "I need to get going," she said, kissing me on the cheek before heading out the door. As the sound of her car faded, I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't keep pretending. Whatever Anna and Dan had, it wasn't innocent, and it wasn't going to stop on its own. I needed a plan. But first, I needed more. More proof, more clarity, more of the truth. No matter how much it hurt, I spent the day drowning in a sea of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness. They all fought for dominance, leaving me hollow and restless. I couldn't focus on work, and Daisy seemed to sense my unease, sticking close to me wherever I went. Her quiet companionship was the only thing grounding me. That evening, Anna texted to say she'd be home late again. "Another client," she claimed. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, wondering if I should confront her. But I knew I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed to see the full picture before I could act. Instead, I decided to follow her again. I left the house about 30 minutes after she did, taking the car this time. I kept my distance as I tailed her to a part of town I rarely visited. It wasn't the salon or anywhere I recognized. She pulled into a small, nondescript motel, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. My chest tightened as I parked a few blocks away, watching her walk inside. My heart pounded as I weighed my next move. Part of me wanted to barge in, to confront her in the middle of whatever she was doing. But another part, the rational, calculating part, held me back. If I walked in there now, what would I achieve? Anger, chaos, maybe even violence. None of it would give me the answers I needed. So I waited. An hour passed. Then two. I sat in the car, staring at the motel door, feeling a mix of dread and disgust. Finally, she emerged, her hair slightly disheveled, her face flushed. Dan was with her. He walked her to her car, his hand brushing against hers, lingering just long enough to make my stomach churn. They exchanged a few words, and then she drove off. I waited for Dan to leave before following her again, this time all the way home. She walked in like nothing had happened, kissed me on the cheek, and asked if I wanted tea before bed. Her calm demeanor was a slap in the face. "No, thanks," I said, my voice strained. "Long day. I think I'll just head to bed." She smiled, brushing a hand over my shoulder as she walked past. "Okay. Love you." I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed later that night, watching her sleep, trying to reconcile the woman lying beside me with the one I'd seen at the motel. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. Did she think I was oblivious? Or did she not care if I knew? As Daisy curled up at my feet, I made a silent promise. I wouldn't let her lies go unanswered. Whatever Anna thought she was hiding, I was going to drag it into the light, and I would make sure she faced the consequences. But for now, I stayed quiet, biding my time. The veil of normalcy between us was thin, and it wouldn't hold much longer. The days that followed were unbearable. Every moment with Anna felt like a cruel charade, her smiles and casual touches hiding the truth I now knew. I couldn't stand the pretense anymore, but I wasn't ready to confront her, not without more evidence. I needed undeniable proof, something she couldn't lie her way out of. That's when I turned to technology. I spent a sleepless night researching ways to track her movements and monitor her communications. It felt wrong, invasive, but my need for answers overpowered my guilt. The next day, I purchased a GPS tracker and a recording device. It felt surreal, like something out of a spy movie, but this was my life now, a life where trust was shattered and paranoia had taken its place. While Anna showered that evening, I placed the GPS tracker under the dashboard of her car. My hands shook as I secured it, Daisy watching from the doorway with her head tilted, as if sensing the weight of what I was doing. The recording device was trickier. I couldn't risk her finding it, so I decided to slip it into her purse. Anna had always been meticulous about her belongings, but I hoped she wouldn't notice the small, innocuous device hidden among her things. The next day, as she left for work, I opened the tracking app on my phone and watched the little dot move across the map. It was exhilarating and heartbreaking all at once. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Her route to the salon, a stop at the cafe for her morning chai. But around noon, the dot veered off course, heading toward a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I clenched my fists as the dot stopped at a private residence. The name on the mailbox read D. Myers. Dan. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The betrayal was no longer just an idea, a suspicion. It was a fact. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. That evening, when Anna came home, I played along with her routine. We ate dinner, walked Daisy, and watched a movie on the couch. She leaned into me like nothing was wrong, laughing at the cheesy dialogue, her head resting on my shoulder. Every laugh, every touch, was like a dagger. Once she was asleep, I retrieved the recording device from her purse and plugged it into my computer. The audio was clear, too clear. Her voice, light and teasing, was unmistakable. But it wasn't just her words that hit me. It was the intimacy in her tone when she spoke to Dan, the laughter that had once been reserved for me. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said at the end of one recording, her voice soft. "Same time, same place." The weight of her words crushed me. This wasn't a fling or a mistake. It was a choice, deliberate and ongoing. I stared at the screen, the audio file still playing, and felt something inside me shift. The sadness that had consumed me for days turned into something darker, something sharper. Anger. Resolve. Anna might think she was in control of this situation, that she could keep me in the dark while she carried on with her secret life. But she was wrong. The game had changed, and I wasn't going to be the passive, clueless husband anymore. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't just want the truth, I wanted justice. And I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, I woke with a purpose. The anger that had brewed overnight fueled me, sharpening my focus. If Anna was willing to throw away our life together for some fling, I was determined to uncover every last detail of her betrayal. No more half-truths, no more assumptions. I needed everything. The GPS tracker revealed her morning routine was unchanged. She went to the salon, grabbed her chai, and stayed put for most of the day. It was almost comforting, seeing her stick to a normal pattern. But as the afternoon wore on, the dot moved again, heading toward the same residential address as before, Dan's house. I followed her that evening, parking a few houses down. It felt surreal, sitting in my car as she stepped out of hers, carrying what looked like a bottle of wine. She laughed as Dan opened the door, his hand brushing against hers as he ushered her inside. The intimacy between them was undeniable, but I needed proof, concrete, irrefutable evidence. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos from the safety of my car. They weren't perfect, but they showed enough. Anna, standing at Dan's door, smiling like she hadn't smiled at me in months. I waited for over an hour, my frustration growing with each passing minute. Finally, she emerged, her hair slightly tousled, her steps light. She looked happy, the kind of happiness I hadn't seen in years. It stung more than I thought it would. Back home, she greeted me with the same practiced ease, kissing me on the cheek and asking about my day. Her lies were so casual, so seamless, that they almost felt real. Later that night, I sifted through the recordings again, listening for clues. One snippet caught my attention, Anna talking to Dan about an upcoming weekend getaway. "It's all set," she'd said. "I told Tom I'd be at a work conference. He won't suspect a thing." The casual way she lied about me was like a punch to the gut. She didn't just cheat. She planned it meticulously, weaving me into her stories as if I were some clueless accessory to her affair. That's when I decided to take things a step further. I contacted a private investigator, a man named Eric who came highly recommended by a friend. I explained the situation in as much detail as I could, though my voice trembled with a mix of anger and humiliation. "Don't worry," Eric assured me. "You've already done the hard part. I'll take it from here." By the time I hung up, a plan was forming in my mind. This wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. It was about taking control, about making Anna face the reality she thought she could ignore. But deep down, another thought lingered, unspoken but ever-present. If this was the end of our marriage, I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I wouldn't let her rewrite our story to make herself the victim. The truth was on my side now, and I intended to use it. The days passed slowly, each one a calculated step toward unraveling Anna's web of lies. Eric, the private investigator, kept me updated with his findings, though most of it only confirmed what I already suspected. Anna and Dan were meeting regularly, sneaking moments that felt more like a twisted game to them than a betrayal to me. Then came Friday evening, the day of the so-called work conference. Anna packed her overnight bag, carefully folding clothes and tucking away toiletries. She was meticulous, almost cheerful, as she prepared for her trip. Watching her felt like witnessing a stranger, someone I didn't recognize anymore. "I'll be back Sunday night," she said casually, slipping her bag over her shoulder. "Don't forget to walk Daisy." "I won't," I replied, forcing a smile. Inside, my chest burned with the weight of her deception. As her car disappeared down the street, I called Eric. "She's on her way," I said. "Keep me posted." For hours, I sat by the phone, waiting for updates. Eric didn't disappoint. By nightfall, he sent me photos of Anna and Dan checking into a cozy lakeside cabin, their smiles bright, their hands intertwined. I stared at the images, my emotions a volatile mix of anger and despair. This was the life she'd chosen, a secret, selfish escape while I stayed home, picking up the pieces. Eric's next call was more chilling. "They're not alone," he said. "It looks like they're meeting another couple. It might be a double date." The thought of Anna sharing this twisted fantasy with others made my skin crawl. I thanked Eric and told him to keep digging. I needed everything: dates, times, places. If Anna thought she could keep this hidden, she was wrong. That night, I walked Daisy around the neighborhood, her leash slack as she trotted beside me. She glanced up occasionally, her eyes bright and trusting, as if sensing I needed her. She was Anna's favorite, her little shadow, and yet I couldn't help but feel a growing attachment to her. Daisy didn't lie. Daisy didn't betray. When I got home, I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Anna. Inside were all the photos, recordings, and notes I'd gathered. Each piece of evidence felt like a dagger, but they were necessary. I wasn't just documenting her betrayal for my sake. I was building my case, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Before bed, I took a final look at the GPS tracker. Anna's car was still at the cabin, unmoving. A part of me wanted to drive there, to see it all for myself. But I knew that wasn't the answer. The time would come to face her, to lay everything out in the open. For now, I had to wait. As I lay in bed, Daisy curled up at my feet, I couldn't help but think of the woman Anna used to be, the one who'd promised forever, who'd held my hand through life's ups and downs. That woman was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And yet, even as the pain threatened to consume me, I felt a flicker of resolve. She thought she could rewrite our story, but I wouldn't let her. The weekend wasn't just hers to enjoy. It was mine to prepare. The weekend crawled by, each hour heavy with anticipation. I busied myself with tasks to keep from spiraling into anger or despair. Daisy was my constant companion, her wagging tail a small comfort as I mulled over what was coming. Eric continued to send updates, each one more damning than the last. The photos painted a vivid picture of Anna's betrayal, her hand in Dan's, their laughter shared with another couple, quiet moments on the cabin's deck as the sun set behind them. It was the kind of life I thought we'd built together, now stolen and shared with someone else. Sunday evening arrived, and with it, Anna's return. I heard her car in the driveway and felt my heart race. Daisy barked, her ears perking up as Anna walked through the door. "Hey," Anna called, dropping her bag by the door and kneeling to greet Daisy. "Did you miss me, baby girl?" Daisy's tail wagged furiously, but I stayed rooted to the couch, my stomach twisting. Anna straightened, brushing a stray hair from her face. "How was your weekend?" she asked, her tone casual. "Fine," I said flatly, not looking up from my laptop. Yours? Busy. The conference was exhausting, but productive. She slipped into the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. Her ease, her practiced lies. It was unbearable. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. I needed her to believe that I was still in the dark. Over dinner, Anna chatted about work, dropping just enough details to make her story seem plausible. I nodded along, barely hearing her words, my mind already planning my next move. That night, as she slept beside me, I opened my laptop and reviewed everything Eric had sent. The photos, the timestamps, the GPS data. It was all there, irrefutable and damning. But it wasn't enough to just confront her. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to face the full extent of her betrayal. And I wanted to take something from her, something she loved, just as she had taken so much from me. My gaze drifted to Daisy, asleep at the foot of the bed. She was Anna's pride and joy, the one thing she doted on unconditionally. The idea formed slowly, painfully, but it felt right. I would take Daisy, not as an act of cruelty, but as a way to reclaim something that mattered. Daisy didn't deserve to be caught in this mess, didn't deserve to live with someone who could so easily betray those she claimed to love. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made my decision. The confrontation was coming, but it wouldn't just be about words. It would be about justice, about showing Anna that actions have consequences. And Daisy would come with me when I walked away from this wreckage. Monday arrived like a storm on the horizon, heavy with anticipation. I had prepared everything: photos, recordings, GPS data, and the timeline Eric had put together. It was all neatly organized, a devastating arsenal of truth. That evening, I waited for Anna to come home. She walked in with the same casual ease, dropping her purse on the counter and heading to the fridge for a drink. Daisy trailed behind her, tail wagging, blissfully unaware of the tension in the air. "Tom, are you okay?" Anna asked, finally noticing my silence. I nodded toward the dining table. "We need to talk." Her brow furrowed as she approached the table, where I'd laid out the evidence. The photos stared up at her, each one a snapshot of her betrayal. For the first time, her calm facade cracked. What is this?" she stammered. "You tell me," I replied, my voice cold. "That's you, isn't it? And Dan?" Anna's face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I let the silence hang, heavy and damning. "How long?" I asked finally. "How long have you been lying to me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Tom, I can explain." "No." I slammed my hand on the table, startling Daisy. "Don't insult me with excuses. I want the truth." She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for what?" I snapped. "To betray me? To destroy our marriage?" Her tears fell freely now, but I felt no sympathy. She'd made her choices, and now she had to face them. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "But I know one thing. You're not the woman I married." The confrontation lasted for hours. Anna tried to explain, to justify, but every word only deepened the chasm between us. She admitted to the affair, but her reasons felt hollow, like she was grasping for something to lessen her guilt. "I was lonely," she said at one point. "You were always so busy, so distant." I laughed bitterly. "And your solution was to cheat? To turn to someone else instead of talking to me?" "I didn't know how to fix us," she whispered. "There is no us anymore," I said coldly. "You killed that the moment you chose him." Anna begged for forgiveness, promised to end things with Dan, but I couldn't listen. The damage was done, and there was no coming back from it. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't tell her where I was going, but as I clipped Daisy's leash onto her collar, Anna's eyes widened. "Wait, what are you doing?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Taking Daisy," I said simply. "You don't deserve her." "She's my dog," Anna protested, stepping toward me. "She's our dog," I corrected. "But after everything you've done, she's better off with me." Anna tried to argue, but I didn't care. I walked out the door with Daisy at my side, leaving her cries behind me. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Daisy adjusted quickly, her cheerful presence a welcome distraction from the storm raging inside me. She seemed to sense when I needed comfort, curling up beside me during the nights when sleep wouldn't come. Meanwhile, Anna bombarded me with calls and texts, alternating between apologies and anger. I ignored them all, focusing instead on rebuilding my life. I filed for divorce, citing her infidelity, and began the long process of untangling our shared existence. As the weeks passed, Anna grew more desperate. She showed up at my apartment one night, her eyes red from crying. "Tom, please," she begged. "Can we just talk?" I let her in, but only to make one thing clear. "There's no fixing this, Anna. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." "But I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "No, you don't," I replied. "You love the idea of me, the stability I gave you. But love doesn't betray. Love doesn't destroy." She left in tears, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of peace. I had said my piece, and there was nothing more to give. The divorce was finalized a few months later. Anna got the house, but I didn't care. I had Daisy, and that was enough. The process was painful, but it also brought closure. I was free, no longer shackled to a marriage built on lies. Eric sent me a final report, a comprehensive account of Anna's affair. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. The past was behind me, and I had no intention of looking back. Life after Anna was quieter, simpler. Daisy and I found a new rhythm, one filled with long walks, lazy afternoons, and the occasional visit to the dog park. I thought about love sometimes, about whether I'd ever trust again. But for now, I was content. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had survived, and that was enough. And as Daisy curled up beside me one evening, her warmth a reminder of the love that remained, I realized something important. The life Anna had tried to destroy wasn't gone. It was just waiting for me to rebuild. And I would, one day at a time.